Exciting news, guys. I finally finished examining all of the manuscripts in my textual criticism experiment, and so in this video I'm going to give you a numerical analysis of all of the textual variants that I found. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Gospel Training Ground. My name is Ryan Haines, and I'm here to help you live out your Christian faith in our post-Christian culture. And so if you want videos on like apologetics and tips on evangelism and how to share your faith, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You can also follow the Gospel Training Ground on Facebook as well. But today I'm making this video because I finally reached a major milestone in my textual criticism experiment. I have gone through every sentence of every single manuscript that I got back, and I've analyzed every word, and I have cataloged and recorded every single textual variant that I could find. This whole process of sorting through all of the manuscripts and counting the variants took me about 4 months, so it was a lot of work to do, but now I'm finally on the last stage of the experiment, which is going through all the variants that I found and working on reconstructing the original text. And then, of course, once I finish reconstructing what I believe the original to be, I'm going to actually compare that to the original document and see how accurate it is. Because again, the whole purpose of this experiment is to help people understand the validity of New Testament textual criticism. And so the thesis for my experiment is this: I believe that if a document is copied successively through multiple lines of transmission, that I can accurately reconstruct that document using only imperfect copies of that document. So that's the goal of the experiment. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and follow the Facebook page to stay tuned for the final results, because I will be putting together a final video with all the final comparisons and analysis and overview of the entire experiment. But as I said earlier, in this video, I just want to go ahead and explain the quality and the quantity of the variants that I discovered in my manuscripts. And just remember that I had a total of 52 copies originally made, and then of those 52 copies, I discarded and destroyed 17 of them, so I only ended up using 35 total manuscripts for this experiment. And of those 35 manuscripts, I chose one of them to be a base text, which simply means it's the text that I use to compare to all the other manuscripts, and any time that a wording in one of the manuscripts differs from the wording in the base text, I count that as a textual variant. And overall, I discovered 396 textual variants in my 35 manuscripts. And that's a lot of variants, but honestly, I was actually surprised at how low the number was. I was thinking it was going to be much closer to like 500 variants or something like that, but still, 396, close to 400, that's still a lot of variants that I have to work through. And the document itself is about 47 sentences long, which averages out to about 8 or 9 variants per sentence. And actually, the sentence that had the most variants was the last and final sentence, which actually had 42 variants in just one sentence. That is a lot. So that's the total number of variants, but now I want to break this down for you just a little bit more, because textual variants are generally divided into two categories: meaningful variants and non-meaningful variants. A meaningful variant, as the name implies, would be any textual variant that changes or alters the meaning of the text. And on the flip side of that, a non-meaningful variant would be a textual variant that has absolutely no impact whatsoever upon the meaning of the text. So as I was going through my manuscripts, I was also being very careful to put these variants in the two different categories of being either meaningful variants or non-meaningful variants. But now I want to be able to break this down even further for you, and so I'm going to switch the screens, and you're going to get a numerical analysis of the textual variants. Alright, so what we have on the screen here is a breakdown of all the textual variants, sort of a numerical analysis of the textual variants. So I broke down all of them into their two basic categories of meaningful variants, non-meaningful variants, as you see in the left column and the right column, and then, the left column and the middle column, and then the column on the right is the totals for everything. So as you can see, the meaningful and non-meaningful variants are also broken down into the different types of variants that I found. As you can see, there are nonsense errors, spelling errors, different words, word order differences, omissions, and additions. And I'm going to go through each one of these and give you examples of them from the text, show you pictures of the actual manuscripts so that you can see what it is that I was actually dealing with. So let's go through the different types of variants that I found. The first type of variant that I had were I called them nonsense errors. That means they are variants that just literally, it was like either some indiscernible writing, or it just said something that grammatically just didn't work, or just whatever it was, it just literally made no sense whatsoever. And so you'll notice that the only nonsense errors that I found are in the non-meaningful variant column. And the reason why I put them there is because every time I found a nonsense error and couldn't discern what it said in the manuscript, that same sentence in that same area where the nonsense error was found in one particular manuscript, it was well established what it said in other manuscripts and in the other lines of transmission. So that was why ultimately I just decided to call them non-meaningful variants, because it was just, again, nonsense. You couldn't make any sense of what it was actually saying, and it was clearly established in all the other lines what it did say, so I just wrote them off as nonsensical. And now let me give you an example of one of these nonsense errors. Some of them are pretty funny, and this is a pretty funny one. So you'll see at the top of the screen you have the base text, and underlined there is where the nonsense error is located in the next manuscript, but the sentence basically says, you know, I never thought I'd see that, and I just tried once more. Okay, now below this you have the manuscript 4.5a, and you can look at the same sentence here, the last sentence of the manuscripts, and it says, you know, I never thought I'd be that Adtridarcy man. I don't know what that says. It's just a string of letters that don't actually make a real word. And so I don't know what the heck the scribe was thinking when they wrote this out or what they were doing, but they ended up just with this jumbled string of letters that I just don't understand, and I don't think anyone can understand. And so it just ended up being this nonsense error that's found there that's just kind of funny to look at. So the next type of variant that I found were spelling errors, and these are just simply words that were spelled wrong. Sometimes the misspelling ended up creating new words or new tenses to the original word that changed the meaning of the text, but most of the times these spelling errors were irrelevant to the meaning, and you could totally easily understand what it was that the scribe was trying to write. And this example that I chose is also one from the final sentence of the manuscript. So here at the top of the screen again you have the base text in which it says, you know, I never thought I'd see that. Okay, now we look at the text from the manuscript on the bottom. This is from manuscript 1.4b, and you see the difference. The base text has, you know, with the hyphen thing in there, kind of putting the words together as if it should be pronounced, you know. But this manuscript actually writes out the word you so that it should be pronounced you know instead of you know, right? And so it means the exact same thing. There's no confusion here about what's being written, but the spelling is different. And so this counted as a non-meaningful spelling textual variant. And this was actually one of the most common spelling variants that I found in the manuscripts. There were quite a few manuscripts that had you know, and there were quite a few other manuscripts that had you know. And so this is one of the ones where I'm really going to have to kind of do my work and look through the textual evidence to discern which one I think was the actual original reading. But again, since it's not meaningful, whichever one I choose, even if it's not what the original said, it still doesn't change the meaning of the text whatsoever. So even if I don't get this variant exactly correct, I'm still accurately reconstructing the text because it doesn't change the meaning at all. Alright, and the next type of variant that I found was differences in words or wording. And as you could see, this was by and large the most common textual variant that I found. It ended up having 164 variants that had to do with the differences in wording. 77 of those were meaningful, 87 of those were non-meaningful, but I ended up with some pretty interesting stuff here. And so I want to show you probably one of the most drastic examples of a meaningful variant that had to do with the difference in wording. Again, at the top of the screen you have the base text, and you see at sentence 39, it says, whatever it was, I said to him, Dad, could you pull out again? And again, this story is about a teenager taking his first driving test with his dad, trying to parallel park, and so it's kind of just the story of how that worked out for the young man. Now, that's what it says in the base text in sentence 39. But now let's look at the bottom of the screen, look at manuscript 3.4b, and in the same sentence, this is what it says. Whatever it was, I said to him, Dad, I hate you, and I'll show you. Dad, I hate you, and I'll show you. That is not even close to what sentence 39 says. That is a drastic difference that has massive change in the meaning of the text. And interestingly enough, this reading that we see in manuscript 3.4b is a reading that I noticed started to develop in the later manuscripts in the third line of transmission. But it's not the reading in the earliest manuscripts of the third line of transmission, nor is it the reading in any of the manuscripts from any of the other lines of transmission. So the only conclusion I can come to is that this was something that a scribe did to change the text at some point along the transmission process in the third line of transmission, and so it ended up becoming a more common reading later on in that line, but it has no foundation as being original to that line or being original to the actual original text itself. But either way, it makes for a pretty intense variant. And the next type of variant I had were variants that had to do with the order of the words as they were written. Now, obviously, you can see this was the least common type of variant. I only had a grand total of 6 of them, and none of them had any impact on the meaning of the text whatsoever. So yeah, didn't have too many of those, and that is actually not comparable to the New Testament because the way that the Greek language works, you can say the same thing in many different ways, switching the words around, and it doesn't really impact the meaning the same way it would in English. And so one of the most common variants that you find in New Testament manuscripts is actually variants that have to do with the word order in the sentence. But here with the English language, where it matters a little bit more, we obviously don't find as many of those. But let me show you a simple example. Here in the base text, sentence 46, it says, "As I write this, I suddenly realize that it has been half a century since that day." Okay, so half a century, that's the phrase we're going to look at. Now we go to manuscript 1.4b, and in that same sentence it says, "As I write this, I suddenly realize that it's been a half century since that day." So the switching of the words is the word a and the word half. Is it half a century or a half century? Honestly, it doesn't matter which one it is because they're both still referring to 50 years of time, so whichever way you write it, it still means the same thing. It's just that the words got mixed up, and you could see how someone could easily do that while copying by hand. And next up are variants of omission. I had a pretty good amount of these, 62 total. Most of them, 37 of them, were meaningful because when you take something out of the text, it usually affects the meaning of the text. But sometimes it was just like simple words that really didn't like impact the meaning of the sentence, like someone was just writing and they might have just forgotten a word or something like that, but it didn't actually change what the sentence was saying. So again, most of them are meaningful, not all of them were, but an omission variant basically just happens when something is left out. It could be anything from one word to one phrase to one whole sentence or even multiple sentences. In fact, in the first line of transmission, there was actually a few manuscripts that omitted 16 entire sentences from the document, so they were significantly shorter than all the rest of the manuscripts that I had. So that was the biggest omission variant. But now let me give you an example of a smaller one that I found. Here in sentence 41, the base text says, "I shut my door and he pulled out into the traffic lane right back to where we started." And we go to manuscript 1.5b, and that same sentence, you notice that the last portion of the sentence is totally not there. It says, "I shut my door and he pulled out into the traffic lane." But the last phrase that says right back to where we'd started, it's not there. It just simply doesn't exist in the manuscript, and so that's obviously an omission. Something was left out there, and so I counted that as an omission variant. And lastly, we have variants of addition, and what that is basically when someone just adds something to the text, or as I saw it, anytime there was something in one of the manuscripts that was not in the base text, I counted that as an addition. And so here's a cool example of one that was actually very meaningful. In sentence 31 in the base text, it says, "I heaved a sigh of relief and he switched off the engine." But in manuscript 3.4, and as you can tell, this is one of my fragmentary manuscripts that has portions of it missing, but in that same sentence, one of the parts of the sentence that's preserved is a part that has an addition in it. It describes the sigh of relief as being a sigh of frustration and relief. So what's added there is this idea of it being a frustrated sigh and not just a relieving sigh. So that word frustration is an addition. Obviously, that's a meaningful variant because it does impact the meaning of the text. So there you have it. That's some of the details about some of the different textual variants that I've been finding in my experiment so far. I hope that you guys are finding this interesting. I know I'm very intrigued by all of this, and I'm definitely excited to see how the reconstruction process goes and see how accurate my text is with the original. And so if you are also wanting to see the final results, then definitely make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the Facebook page so you can get all the latest updates, and check out some of the other videos that I have on here as well about textual criticism, apologetics, and how to share your faith with others.